And good morning. I know the scriptures say to rejoice when others rejoice, and the university family rejoices that Brian, I know you're thrilled to have your parents here, and Kathy and Brian, all of your kids here. Sidonia with some of yours here. That's what Mother's Day is all about. We appreciate that. Amy coming long distance with her new arrival, and Grandma Dana. That's kind of an interesting picture there for me. But I know she's proud and beaming, and Leroy's got one of his other daughters here too. So we've got a house full of visitors. We've got a lot of flowers on you that represent the love and care that your families have been expressing. So we indeed want to say and express the same thing, and that we love you and love you for that, and happy Mother's Day. With that, a small little update. Some people asked about my inside of the bulletin talking about our mother goose. She has been 25 days on the nest now and counting. Pat and I have done a really good job of keeping all the visitors at bay, I guess, as we could. She gets more attention than most of this church ever has, I'm sure, on the outside. We've got visitors of all kinds, but if we read right, and I am no gooseologist, the goslings, I guess, they take about 28 to 30 days to hatch. And so if we're at 21, this should be the week. So hopefully we'll have pictures. If you aren't able to see, she's tucked away on the side of the building. As I said, not probably the ideal place that a mom would pick a nest, but who am I, to say that that's not the ideal place. She's got some good lighting, she's got some protection, and she's got what she needs. So we have been on goose watch, I guess, for a while, and so we'll hopefully have another mother, I guess, of the animal kingdom this week. But on this day, we honor mothers. It's so good for us to think about how much you mean to each one of us, what you represent, why you have family representing you today, or flowers, or maybe even a memory or two. Such love, teaching, and dedication that you've expressed. And we're all reminded of motherhood and what it stands for. Being a mother is not always an easy role, as most of your mothers already know. I go on and on. There's so many poems, so many things you can capture at a time like this. But by the time a child reaches 18, a mother has had to do and handle some 18,000 hours of just child-related work, just involvement, hours-wise, just putting forth. And we talked a little bit about that as them being an encouragement in our lives this morning. A junior high school teacher lectured on the properties of magnets for an entire class. The next day, he gave the students a quiz. And the first question read like this: my name begins with an M, has 6 letters, and I pick things up. When am I? Half in the class wrote mother. Supposed to get magnet out of it, but they knew how much they got picked up after. Now, I can relate to that personally, of having my mom pick up after me. I heard a story of a father who was trying to explain the concept of marriage to his 4-year-old daughter. He got out the wedding album thinking maybe visual images would help, and explained the entire wedding service to her. When he finished, he asked if she had any questions. She said just one. She pointed to the picture and asked, "Daddy, is that when Mommy came to work for us?" And Ralph Waldo Emerson has said, "Men, what are they without the mothers who made them?" As we share great memories about Mom today, let's also remember that there are some great portraits of motherhood that we could go on and on, found in scriptures. Whether it's Mary, the mother of Jesus, I'm sure maybe a message or two is pointed out in her illustration. Maybe it's the virtuous woman. I've done one before in the past on Mother's Day, found in Proverbs. Maybe it's the mother of Moses. If you think about that, who cared so much for her son that she even had to break the law in order to teach him of his faith, the faith of his people, which he later never forgot, of truly who he was, as he went into the Egyptian paradise of being without want to being within the kingdom. She also had to make a decision, ultimately give him up, and maybe for good, as she put him in the basket to send him down the river. We know that God was in control of that and sovereign in his choices, and we know by reading that she would be chosen by Pharaoh's daughter to care for him, but she didn't know that now, at the time, when she put him in the basket, did she? She wasn't promised anything. She did what instinctively mothers do, and she also trusted in God. for him to take care of the rest. It was first out of her love and for her son that she was even willing to do and risk just about anything and everything, including the fact of maybe even possibly never seeing him again so he might live, as the creed was to kill all these young males off. Maybe it's the mother who spoke up in Solomon's wisdom and judgment after they were fighting over the same child. And he says, well, why don't you just cut the child in half? And not dividing that child in half, the sacrificial love of the true mother appeared before the king and told him that she was willing to let the other have her son, take it away by a stranger, by another woman, rather than see any harm come to that child. See, as Solomon in his wisdom suggests dividing the child in two, he knew that the real mother would never allow harm to that child, and then he, through that judgment, was able to determine who the rightful mother was. There is the mother of James and John, who loved her boys so much that she wanted them to sit by the Lord's side in the heavenly kingdom. Now we know they were corrected on that, but she really didn't know what she was asking for as well. But nonetheless, she presented the idea on behalf of her sons to Jesus himself. What boldness and love that she displayed for her two sons, even though it may have been a little misplaced. There's also mentioned the mother of King Lemuel, who gave up some advice to her son about godly living and how to pick a good wife in Proverbs 31. Some of you have heard a message or two about the virtuous woman, usually hearing of her story during Mother's Day presentations such as these. I'm also aware that Mother's Day also may be a difficult time for some of you as well. Maybe you want to be a mother but can't for some reason. Perhaps some of you have not had the best mother in the world. Maybe you've lost a child. Some of you have even lost your mother. Some others feel and express the pain of a wayward child, and some of you might be doing the parenting all alone as you work hard to nurture a child's faith more. And to those, we salute you as well. Or to maybe even help raise a grandchild today. I want to begin by giving you this message. A mother can be a significant spiritual impact on her children. I knew Keith said many a times that when he's teaching class that many of you were his teacher. And how could he be teaching you something that he learned from you so long ago? Sure, those things stand out and a spiritual impact greater than probably most others in our lives. But there's also another one that I wanted to point out today that's a little bit more of a silent mother. So if you will open your Bibles this morning, I want to talk to someone that doesn't really have a name in the story. I can't even give credit to who she is. All we know is her character. Her story is found in Matthew 15:21 through 28. If you want to turn there, there's a Bible in the middle pew if you want to borrow one there. Matthew 15:21 and 28, entitled, The Nameless Mother with Great Faith. Verse 21. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from the vicinity came to him, crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession. Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. He replied, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Yes, Lord, she says, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered, Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted. And her daughter was healed from that very hour. That's it. That's the story. Have you ever known a person whose character could be summed up in these 4 words? You have great faith. As I said, we only know what region of the country she resided in. We don't even have her first name. Wouldn't we all want to be defined in the end in this way, that we had great faith? Well done, good and faithful servant is the words that we want to hear from our Lord one day. To know deep down in our hearts, in our heart of hearts, that we can totally trust God. We mentioned a little bit, I won't want to reemphasize too much about the rain that we've received at God's hand. And we mentioned in class how we appreciate that so much. Because He is in control, and He knows what we have been going through for 4 years. And we prayed, and He has given us in an abundance. That we can really totally trust God to that degree. I know, not putting against our city, but the city was at odds of really not knowing what to do. Do we kind of recycle the water and kind of go into that measure? Do we cloud seed? Do we get on our hands and knees and pray? I wish they would have said that. Let's have a day of prayer for the city of Lawton. That was not suggested. They're grasping. They don't know. The water was drying up. The lakes were disappearing. The ponds had been long since gone. What are we going to do? Do we have that kind of trust in God, knowing? I knew that it was going to come through. I didn't know when. I don't know for how long, but to have that kind of trust. And she knew with all of her heart. And so can we see that Jesus is the answer. In verse 28 of this passage, Jesus said to a Gentile mother, "You have great faith." Now, she was a Canaanite woman, a Gentile, who came from the country north of Palestine, a country, by the way, that was hostile to the Jews. We're going to talk about her plight of getting to Jesus and what kind of barriers she had to overcome and what we can too in our faith. It would be very dangerous territory for her to cross. The only other thing that we know is that she had at least this one child, but that's all we really know about her. We don't even know her name. All we know is that her one single encounter with Jesus, He ultimately said to her, "You have great faith." Only 4 words. But they were enough to be remembered with her in His book and enshrined for eternity as one of the greatest mothers of all time. You say, how so? I mean, you talk about Mary, you talk about the mother of Moses, you talk about all these other great mother examples. How could she be up there on the top of the list? See, the 4 words that were indicated to her and tell us everything that we need to know. And we can trust this about her, that the fact that Jesus was the one that says it can really define that. We would say that Jesus is an expert on faith, wouldn't you say? The Bible tells us that we are to search it out like a gem collector searches for fine jewels. And when He found it, He was filled with joy. He didn't always find that kind of faith, even in His disciples, did He? Not once did He say to Peter, James, or John, "You have great faith." On the contrary, how many times in contrast did He say just the opposite? "Ye of little faith, how long do I have to be with you?" But He said to this nameless mother, who was not one of them, one from outside of the house of Israel, a Gentile and a Canaanite woman. So from what we see, how did this woman deserve such praise from God? What did she do? Well, she did some remarkable things that we kind of want to know. One, she crossed great barriers. I mentioned a couple, but the one that stands out the most is that she was a woman. We've talked about the woman at the well too, and when Jesus encountered her, it was by no coincidence that the disciples were off getting provisions. They were in the city getting food, other things that were needed. Why do you think they weren't there? I think for obvious reasons. They would have made sure that that was not an approach that He should engage with a woman at the well. And here this woman, she was a Gentile. She was a Canaanite. So we have a mother who in her need was prepared to cross any obstacle to turn to Jesus for the answer. For help going into hostile territory. The location help spells out that even with each one of us, faith still requires that we make an effort to cross whatever barriers that we may stand in our way. What barriers, you may ask? We have several barriers that we don't even count them as barriers. For some of us, it's time. How often do we think and say often we're just too busy with the things to pay attention to the greater things, to the spiritual things, to study more, to give more attention, to pray more, to develop more, even relationshiply. To even simply pick up a Bible, look for even more ways of serving Him. Have we become quite comfortable with my schedule, my life? You may have to cross a time barrier to get to Jesus. And somehow we may think this is what God's plan is for me, to live comfortable here. And when I die, I live even more comfortably. Our life can be mainly just be about our comforts of our life and become what's the most important thing in our life. We talked a little bit about that, encouraging others today in our class. practical ways of encouraging others, that we have a transfer method of all of our blessings that God has blessed us with should transfer to someone else. Then there could be the issue of trusting. Trusting someone who lived some 2,000 years ago. Some people are hard-pressed to even put their arms around a concept of such nature to come to Christ. The time gap from all of them seeing and experiencing his ministry on earth. We have to dig deep in the scriptures to make some of these events come alive, which I try to do on a weekly basis here from the pulpit. It doesn't show sometimes that Jesus is living in the lives of others. And for some, he is just ancient history. Oh yeah, there was a Jesus one day, wasn't there? It doesn't show. Just nice stories to tell from long ago. There is the great barrier of our culture. We sometimes think that God doesn't really understand the problems that we face in this modern world. And what about this politically correctness that we live in, that we're told to be tolerant of all things, we often accused of being too elusive and exclusive. There is the barrier of pride, possibly, which can be the greatest barrier of all, I suppose. And then there's the barrier of new science. If you can't see it, it doesn't really exist. They want to tell our children, if you believe in God, that equate to you believing in just fairy tales. It's all made up and make-believe. So as we look at her story more closely, what exactly was it that drove this mother to cross her own barriers and get to Jesus? I'll give you a few that we can suggest today. Number one, that we can all admit and see that it was truly out of her desperation. She had tried other ways, other methods, and they have failed. Maybe called a doctor or two and got a referral for a second opinion, and that wasn't coming to task, like many of us seek out for other answers. Now she would seek help from Jesus, regardless of the cost and where it may take her, what she would do. Secondly, we see her love. It's love for a child. Love made her accept that even though Jesus was silent at first, and yet she still appealed to him. Love made her suffer apparent discouragement from who? From the disciples. They're trying to keep her away from Jesus. She didn't stop. A lot of times that can be our stop. We can't go any further. And there were others that wanted her to leave them and Jesus alone. Her pleading got to be so much the disciples didn't know what else to do with her. Jesus, it's up to you. Can you just finally make it so that you make her go away? Not dealing with whatever issue she's got. We just want to send her out. Do you see there that compassion and love and persistence on the behalf of her child? These were disciples, mind you. And what did they say in verse 23? So his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. She's persistent. Where was the compassion for her in this situation? Another teaching method for them, I suppose. Where is ours oftentimes? Sadly, I hear some of us cry out the same thing when we may be asked to reach out and help someone. She had the vision. She saw in Jesus a compassion that would not turn her away. See, he was approachable from all aspects of life, from every walks of life. She believed in his ability, and not only that, but his willingness to help, because that was being extended as well. It was being taught. That's why so many came. Not many were turned away. The measure of our faith is conditioned by what we see in Jesus. We often sing a hymn that finds these words, turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace. The second thing that this mom did that Jesus himself gives her some praise is that she persisted. This mother refused to be put off or intimidated. Notice she was not going to take the criticism or silence, not only from what the disciple says, but the silence is Jesus, and not go away. Because let's not forget, there was at least 3 intimidating factors. I first brought up that she was a woman, that she was a Gentile, and hostile territory. The crowds can turn you on a moment's notice. And a Canaanite, above all of that, would have kept her from her persistence. But it was also the silence of Jesus in verse 23. She didn't perceive it as indifference, as some would suggest. I wonder why. See, she reached behind it and spoke to the great heart of God. Even the rebuke of the disciples in 23, she was there and heard their comments. This wasn't like whispers, getting a personal silent note to Jesus. It was said out loud. And what did she do? Well, she did what we all should do, appeal to the higher source, the only source. They were going to the same source too, where she would ultimately get the answer. She went over their heads, so to speak, going directly to the Lord himself. There was also the initial behavior of Jesus in 24. What he said in effect was, sorry, ma'am, but you don't belong to the right group. You have no claim on me. She didn't try to analyze his response. She simply refused to be put off by it, not offended. She let her need speak for itself. She fell at his feet and cried out, help me, sir. That's the essence of all great faith. To stretch out your hand to Jesus out of desperation. Oftentimes, with even my own life, we don't see the desperation and the need of the cross or the need of the cross daily because I got this. I've got a handle on it. I'm taking care of it. See, that's why I was reminded in this rain situation. We did all that. Cloud seeding and all these other things, and the water just kept evaporating. But who ultimately took care of our whole region. It wasn't just like before when rains would come and we'd say, oh, well, Wichita Falls got some and we didn't. Or Altus got lucky this time and we didn't. We see all those words. He made sure the whole area was blanketed enough times, circled over and did it again for a repeat. We're enough, and I hated to even say that. Some people are saying, is this too much rain? Don't say that. We don't want to go backwards to what we were. We understand that. I often wondered, why did God send so much quail? They cried out for meat, and they got some, knee deep and beyond. In fact, some of them were choking to death with it. They just couldn't get enough of it. God always overfills, always gives us more than what we need. What kind of persistence and devotion do we have these kind of days? Are we willing to even do what this woman did? For our cause, to do whatever it takes. Washington Irving wrote, the love of a mother is never exhausted. Isn't that the truth? How we've seen mothers all hours of the night with worry and care, and it just goes on and on. And that's who you are in a lot of your natures. It never changes. It never tires. It endures through all in good repute, in bad repute, he writes. In the face of the world's condemnation, a mother's love still lives on. That's what I always say. The last person to love you is what? Is your mother. Mother always will love you. Now, I know there's some extreme situations where it shows not, but I hope that can be said of many of us, that we are never tiring of following in the steps of Jesus. And that's what we talked about in our class today, about encouraging even when we're doing good. Because Galatians 5 and 9 says, don't become weary of doing good. And I hope that we can show and live out the example of great faith exercised as this woman did. Persistence is the hallmark of godly motherhood. And the third quality of this mother that caused Jesus to praise her was she made no claim, verse 27. See, because that's what the Pharisees were trying to do. I deserve to be here. I have merited your favor. I want this from you. That's what all the appeal was for the religious. You're not even with one of me. I understand that. I'm not even putting claim to that. She relied on the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. We don't deserve what he gives any of us either. It is a gift of God, lest any man should boast. We do not deserve what he has given us. When our Lord told her that it didn't seem right to take bread from the children of Israel and throw it to the little dogs of the Gentiles. By the way, when you look at that reference point, it's not dogs. There's two qualifications of dogs. There are the dogs that run the street, the rabid dogs. The Pharisees, they're talking about those dogs. This is like a family dog, and you know the difference. You wouldn't get a mangy coyote and invite him into your house. But a cute little dog that has been get off his leash that you couldn't wait to get in your arms and was happy to see you, tail wagging, would take him home and try to find him a home or try to do something with it. That's what this is. It's got a family pet. That kind of a dog, not a detriment. She understood it in that way too. She didn't burst into tears. She didn't walk away sorrowful, get mad, huff off. How dare you call me this? Instead, she gave Jesus an answer that must have excited him beyond anything that he had heard as recent days. Look at what he said. True, sir, I admit that I have no claim on you, but there must be some extra grace for even someone like me. Joshua read the scripture before the communion, which we should all remember, that Christ loved us when? When we were in the inner circle? When we were doing all the things right? No, he loved us when we were yet sinners. Loved us to send his son to the cross when we were yet outside the circle. That's me. That's you, lost, sinful, some grace that I don't deserve. And I'm just appealing to you on that nature, not anything that I have done, not self-righteousness. There is no wonder Jesus replied, woman, you have great faith. No wonder from that moment, with that being said by Jesus, it made it so. What was that? Her request. And it says, and the little girl was healed at that very moment. See, she understood, which a lot of people thought, well, maybe I have to have Jesus touch me, and I'll touch the hem of the garment. And that was made it so, because her faith brought it to that point. Or maybe if I could just have him pray over me and put his hands over me. And there was a lot of people that did that too. She went beyond that, and she says, and we all know by John's writing, that he spoke everything in existence. And everything that we know now was created by his word. Let there be light. Just make it so. She appealed on that kind of faith. She says, I don't even have to bring my daughter with me. All you have to say is she is healed, and it will get done. Now you see what kind of faith she had? She knew all he had to say is to speak the miracle, not be the miracle, touch her as a miracle. Her daughter was made whole, and she believed with all of her heart, if he just says it, it will be done. This mother possessed great faith because she won over her difficulties. Every obstacle and opposition may be conquered by faith through prayer. So for us, don't despair when faced with a problem. We will all face from time to time and have our own barriers, even if we aren't mothers. Now, this example is for all of us, demonstrated by who? A mother. For her daughter. So I suggest we cross whatever barriers we have to get to Jesus. Persist in your belief. Receive his grace, which he offers freely to all who will approach him. So this message can be taken in for all of us. But again, you mothers, especially on this day, I hope that you will enjoy this day set aside to honor you and for all what you do, for all who you are, and all that you represent. But let us all start to show our faith a little more and maybe cross some barriers, because in the end it is so worth it. What kind of perseverance are you willing to take? And then take them to Jesus, and let us possess the persistence that is needed to keep seeking out God and his will for us, just like this unnamed mother showed. It's an example for every one of us. For someone that we can't even give credit to who she was. That wasn't the point. She didn't even have to have a name for us, did she? Because her character and her example spoke more volumes than if I was to tell you her name. That's what oftentimes are asked about. What will it be said about us when we die? Sure, there'll be a name, there'll be an epitaph, there'll be an obituary, but what legacy will live on? What kind of example are you leaving now for generations? Because as you well know, there are people that have been dead and gone that we still even speak of today, of their example and what they've given to us. See, that speaks generationally. You thought that your just life went until you died. Your life goes on and carries on. And unlike the superheroes of the day that we call athletes that say, don't look to me as a role model, I'm sorry, that's the position you're in. We're all going to have influence, whether good or bad. We're all going to be looked at. But I hope that you've taken encouragement from this Canaanite woman that's given us an example of what it takes to get to Jesus. If we can be of any help to you, we'd offer that as an invitation that we can pray with you and for you. Maybe you've never obeyed the gospel and like to have that as afforded to you as well, and everything is ready and everything is prepared for this moment, if that is your desire. Whatever your need is, if you have one, if you'll come now, make it known as we stand and as we sing.